You were told school was the path to freedom. Study hard, obey the bell, finish the test, respect the deadline, raise your hand, ask for permission, sit still, stay inside the outline, repeat what authority already approved. For 12 years or more, your nervous system was trained to survive inside rules designed by strangers. Not to build, not to own, not to command, to comply. And then they called it education. But look closer. Nobody sat you down and explained money with brutal honesty. Nobody taught you how income is extracted, how ownership multiplies, how taxes reward structure, how debt can either shackle a life or finance an empire. They taught you how to become efficient inside somebody else's machine. Reliable, predictable, replaceable. That was not an accident. It was a design. A civilization cannot keep its pyramid standing if too many people understand who really gets paid. So the game was disguised as virtue. Work hard, be humble, save your money, get a stable job, wait your turn, trust the system. Meanwhile, the architects of the system were teaching their children a different language, a colder language, a language built on leverage, perception, incentive, and control. And this is the part that should unsettle you. The absence of financial education was never just ignorance, it was convenience for them. Because a person who understands money stops asking for permission. A person who understands money begins to see structure. And once you see structure, you can never again mistake a cage for a career. Tonight, you are not here for comfort. You are here to see the hidden architecture. You are here to understand why good people stay broke, why disciplined people still feel powerless, and why the world rewards strategy long before it rewards virtue. These are the dark money lessons school ignored. And if you understand them, you stop being managed, you start becoming dangerous. Human beings are not controlled by chains first. They are controlled by narratives. Your mind obeys whatever story it repeats often enough. If you were told that money is scarce, you move cautiously. If you were told rich people are greedy, you sabotage your own ambition. If you were taught that security matters more than sovereignty, you confuse survival with success. And once those beliefs harden, you do not need a prison guard. You carry the prison in your own thinking. That is how most financial lives are built, not on math, on conditioning. You learn to seek approval before action. You learned to fear mistakes more than mediocrity. You learned that being chosen by institutions was safer than choosing your own path. So you became emotionally attached to certainty, even when certainty was slowly suffocating you. This is the first psychological trap. You think money is an external problem, a market problem, a wage problem, a luck problem. But before money becomes visible in your bank account, it lives invisibly in your identity. If your mind sees authority as safety, you will keep offering your labor to systems that rent your life by the hour. If your mind sees ownership as risky, you will stay loyal to the very structures that drain your future. If your mind sees wealth as for other people, you will unconsciously protect your limitations as if they were moral principles. That is the philosophical truth beneath finance. People do not merely earn according to skill, they move according to self-permission. And most people never become financially free because they never become psychologically free. They remain mentally domesticated, productive, yes, intelligent maybe, but internally obedient. So before you learn money, you must learn yourself, because every empire begins with one invisible act, a mind refusing to kneel. Lesson 1, the salary trap. You were taught to believe a high salary means high value. It does not. A salary is not a tribute to your worth. It is the minimum price required to keep you inside someone else's system long enough to make that system function. That is why companies do not pay according to your potential. They pay according to the market rate of your replaceability, your tolerance, and your willingness to remain dependent. Your salary is not a crown, it is a retention strategy. Think about the psychology of it. The paycheck arrives just often enough to calm your fear, but not often enough to create freedom. It covers the mortgage, it feeds the lifestyle, it funds the illusion of progress. And because the numbers look respectable, your ego starts defending the very structure that owns your weekdays, your energy, your attention, your aging. You become proud of the trap. That is what makes it elegant. You start measuring yourself by annual income, while ignoring the more dangerous question, how long could you stop working before your world collapsed? A man making $200,000 with no real assets may look powerful. In reality, he is often a well-dressed hostage. His cost of living rises with his paycheck. His identity fuses with his title, and his fear of leaving becomes the hidden chain around his throat. This is why the salary trap is so effective. It does not imprison the desperate. It seduces the competent. You know the type. The person with a respectable job, a decent apartment, expensive habits, constant stress, and no actual leverage. Every month begins at zero again. Every vacation is purchased exhaustion. Every raise buys temporary relief, then disappears into inflation, taxes, and upgraded consumption. You were never supposed to build your life on wages alone. Wages can stabilize, but they cannot liberate, not unless they are converted into something that no longer depends on your presence. If your income stops when you stop, you do not own a life. You own a schedule. Lesson 2. Assets versus labor. There is a biological ceiling on labor. You have 24 hours, one body, one brain, one heartbeat slowly burning down. No matter how disciplined you are, you cannot infinitely scale the number of hours you can sell. Time for money is a transaction against your mortality, and mortality always wins. That is the brutal arithmetic nobody explained. Labor is noble, but labor alone is fragile. The wealthy understand something darker and simpler. Effort must eventually become independent from income. That is where assets enter the story. An asset is not something you buy to feel successful. It is something that continues producing value after your direct effort has ended. A business with systems, equity in a growing company, intellectual property, real estate that cash flows, media that monetizes, code, distribution, ownership. An asset works while your body sleeps. Labor does not. This is the dividing line between exhaustion and leverage. And this lesson is psychological before it is financial. Because building assets requires a different relationship with time. Employees think in pay periods. Owners think in compounding cycles. Employees ask, what do I earn this week? Owners ask, what can I build now that keeps paying me later? One mindset consumes life in increments. The other stores life in systems. Look at your own behavior. After work, where does your energy go? Into scrolling, into entertainment, into recovery from a life you hate? Most people use every leftover ounce of consciousness to escape pressure. The elite use leftover consciousness to build escape velocity. That is the uncomfortable truth. Real wealth is often born after the official workday ends, not because sleep does not matter, but because someone decided that temporary fatigue was cheaper than permanent dependence. You do not need to quit reality tomorrow. You need to stop worshipping labor as the final form of value. Labor is the seed, assets are the tree, and until your money begins producing without your permission, you are still trapped in a loop where survival depends on your continued obedience to the clock. The rich do not simply work harder, they work toward irrelevance. They build structures that no longer need them every minute. That is power. Lesson 3. The saver's punishment. You were told saving cash was wisdom, and at a certain level, discipline matters, emergency reserves matter, liquidity matters. But the middle class was sold a half-truth so comforting, it became a financial sedative. Save. Be patient. Leave your money still. Trust the bank. Trust the numbers on the screen. Trust the polite lie that cash sitting idle is safety. It is not safety. It is slow erosion. Inflation is one of the quietest theft mechanisms ever normalized. It does not kick down your door. It does not announce itself like a robbery. It simply weakens your purchasing power year after year until the money you worked for can no longer command what it once could. The tragedy is that disciplined people suffer this most. The cautious, the careful, the ones who followed the rules. They save in currency. The wealthy save in scarcity. That is the difference. Cash is useful for movement, but over long periods, cash is often a melting ice cube. The elite understand that real protection comes from owning things governments cannot print into worthlessness. Productive businesses, valuable land, rare equity, hard assets, strategic exposure to appreciation. They let inflation attack the currency while they hold the assets inflation tends to lift. So the saver feels virtuous while getting poorer in silence. This is why the system feels unfair, because it is not designed merely to reward effort. It rewards positioning. Imagine two people with equal discipline. One stores every extra dollar in cash for 10 years. The other acquires ownership in scarce income-producing assets. Both make sacrifices. Both delay pleasure. But time treats them differently. One wakes up feeling responsible and strangely left behind. The other looks reckless at first, then becomes untouchable later. Understand the philosophy here. Money is not wealth. Money is a claim check on wealth. And if the claim weakens while you sleep, then passivity is not prudence. It is surrender. Save enough to breathe. Then convert the rest into things that can fight time on your behalf. Because in a world built on silent dilution, hoarding cash is not neutral. It is decay dressed as discipline. Lesson 4. The tax code incentive. Most people talk about taxes with emotion. The powerful study them as signals. Anger changes nothing. Understanding changes everything. The tax code is not just a collection of penalties. It is an incentive structure. It quietly reveals what society wants more of. And one of its clearest messages is this: ownership is rewarded more intelligently than labor. Employees earn, then taxes are taken, then they spend what remains. Owners often spend in the process of producing, deduct strategically within legal boundaries, and are taxed on what survives after expenses, structure, and investment. That is not a loophole, that is the map. School taught you how to earn a grade. It did not teach you how to read incentives. So you entered adulthood believing fairness governed the system. It does not. Incentives govern the system, and incentives do not care about your feelings. They reward behaviors that expand production, risk capital, create entities, and move money through structures instead of through bare hands. This is why two people can generate similar economic value and still experience reality differently. The employee lives exposed. The owner lives positioned. One is visible to extraction. The other is shielded by design. This lesson is not telling you to evade anything. It is telling you to mature, to stop seeing the world like a child asking whether the game is fair, and start seeing it like an adult asking how the game is actually arranged. That question changes everything. A real-life example is painfully common. You work a job, you celebrate a raise, then taxes bite, inflation bites, lifestyle expansion bites, the emotional high fades. Meanwhile, a small business owner reinvests into tools, people, marketing, systems, education, and expansion. One lives after deduction, the other grows before exhaustion. The wealthy do not merely earn more, they structure better. And structure is invisible power. The moment you understand that money loves architecture, not just effort, your perspective changes. You stop asking only how to make more. You start asking where to make it, through what vehicle, under what entity, with what long-term strategic consequence. Because if labor is the front door of money, structure is the vault. Lesson 5. The weapon of debt. Debt is one of the most misunderstood forces in modern life because it carries moral heat. People speak of it as if it were pure evil, but debt is not moral. It is directional. It amplifies the intelligence or foolishness of the hand that uses it. The poor are taught to fear debt, then seduced into consumer debt anyway. Credit cards for status, car loans for image, financing for gadgets that depreciate, monthly payments for things that impress strangers for 6 seconds and burden the owner for 6 years. That is destructive debt. Debt used to buy liabilities. Debt used to decorate insecurity. Debt used to consume tomorrow for the sake of today's emotional relief. The elite do something colder. They use debt as leverage, not to look rich, to become richer. Strategic debt acquires assets that produce cash flow, appreciation, or control greater than the cost of the borrowed money. The poor borrow to escape discomfort. The powerful borrow to expand reach. Same instrument, different psychology, different result. This is the hidden war, because debt exposes who you really are. If you lack discipline, debt magnifies chaos. If you lack patience, debt accelerates regret. But if you understand cash flow, risk, margins, and timing, debt becomes a tool that lets you move with more force than your current savings alone would allow. That does not mean recklessness. It means precision. A relatable example: one person finances a luxury car they cannot truly afford because it makes them feel significant. Every month, that payment extracts life from future decisions. Another person uses financing to acquire a productive asset, a skill machine, a business system, a revenue-generating opportunity. One payment drains, the other payment feeds. The difference is not the debt, it is the intent. So ask yourself a ruthless question every time you borrow. Does this debt make you look powerful, or does it make you more powerful? One inflates the ego, the other expands the empire. And if you do not learn that distinction, debt will smile like freedom while quietly training you to work for things that never loved you back. Lesson 6. The currency of usefulness. You were told networking is about meeting people, smiling correctly, collecting contacts, making impressions. But the market does not reward remembered faces for long. It rewards remembered value. It is not about who you know. It is about who remembers you when something important needs to be solved. That is a completely different game. Charm can open a door once. Usefulness keeps the door unlocked. If you make money, save money, create opportunities, reduce friction, bring insight, connect the right people, simplify a hard process, or see patterns others miss, you become unforgettable. Not because you were loud, because you were necessary. That is how real networks form, not in shallow social rituals, in repeated proofs of value. Human behavior follows self-interest more than sentiment. People say they admire honesty, kindness, authenticity, and often they do. But when pressure rises, they remember competence. They remember who delivered under tension. They remember who could be trusted with outcomes. In the adult world, reputation is not built on being liked. It is built on being useful at a level difficult to replace. This is why many intelligent people stay invisible. They confuse hidden talent with strategic influence. They wait to be discovered instead of becoming structurally relevant. They want access without leverage, proximity without proof. It does not work that way. A real-life example: two people attend the same industry event. One hands out business cards, talks about ambition, posts photos, and disappears. The other listens carefully, identifies one painful problem people keep mentioning, and solves it for free or faster or better than expected. Months later, only one of them is getting referred into rooms where money actually moves. Usefulness is social capital with sharp edges, and when cultivated correctly, it becomes one of the most anti-fragile forms of wealth on earth. Markets crash. Trends shift, titles vanish, but a person known for creating value keeps being pulled back into relevance. So stop asking how to be seen, start asking how to become indispensable, because people rarely rescue potential, they recruit precision. Lesson 7. Perception over reality. This is where many good people lose their innocence. You assume the best product wins. Often it does not. The market rewards perceived value more consistently than actual value. Branding, positioning, story, signals, packaging, environment, confidence, association, social proof, price anchoring. A mediocre offer presented like power will often defeat a superior offer presented like uncertainty. That is not romantic. It is real. People do not buy facts first. They buy meaning. They buy what something says about them. They buy what reduces doubt. They buy what feels premium, trusted, scarce, or socially validated. Excellence matters, yes, but excellence hidden in the dark loses to visible competence dressed in authority. This is why being good is not enough. You must become legible to the market. This is not permission to lie. It is a demand to understand human perception. If you look uncertain, people project risk. If you look cheap, people question quality. If your message is weak, your value becomes invisible, no matter how extraordinary your actual substance may be. Think of the skilled worker who undercharges, stays quiet, and wonders why less talented people keep winning. The answer is brutal. The world cannot reward what it cannot perceive. If you do not signal value, you force buyers to guess. And when buyers guess, fear wins. A relatable example lives everywhere. The expert consultant with no positioning fights for scraps. The polished competitor with a sharper brand, stronger testimonials, and clearer messaging commands 10 times the fee. Same market, same audience, different perception. The philosophical lesson is even deeper. Reality matters in private, perception rules in public, and money often moves in public first. So build the substance, yes, but also build the frame. Learn language, learn presentation, learn status signals, learn how trust is manufactured in the mind before it is confirmed in the experience. Because the market is not a courtroom rewarding objective truth on sight. It is a theater of interpretation. And if you refuse to understand the stage, do not be surprised when lesser actors steal the applause. Lesson 8. The two sides of compounding. Compounding is not just a financial concept. It is a law of consequence. Small repeated directions become giant outcomes. The world rarely changes you with one dramatic moment. It changes you with quiet repetition that seems harmless until it becomes irreversible. The wealthy understand this with assets. The masses suffer this with liabilities. Compound interest in your favor is a patient servant. Ownership grows. Returns generate returns. Skill attracts opportunity. Reputation multiplies trust. Audience builds distribution. Capital becomes a magnet for more capital. At first, the progress looks insulting in its slowness. Then one day it becomes terrifying in its force. Against you, compounding is a predator. Credit card balances, lifestyle inflation, recurring subscriptions, poor habits, deferred decisions, emotional spending, tiny indulgences fused to long timelines. A few bad percentages repeated under the veil of normalcy can quietly dismantle a decade. That is why compounding is moral in one sense. It reveals your direction. It does not care about your intentions, only your repetition. Look at a real-life pattern. Someone earns more every year, yet never escapes pressure because every increase in income triggers a matching increase in expense. Another person earns modestly but acquires assets, studies markets, reduces liabilities, and lets time accumulate force around good decisions. In the early years, they look similar. In the later years, they live on different planets. This is the cruelty and beauty of the law. What you repeat, you become, financially, emotionally, spiritually. So stop looking only for dramatic breakthroughs. Those are rare and unstable. The more important question is colder. What is quietly multiplying in your life right now? Interest or debt? Skill or distraction? Equity or consumption, authority or dependence? Compounding is always running, even when you are not paying attention. That should humble you, and it should awaken you, because if you align yourself with compounding assets, compounding trust, compounding discipline, and compounding ownership, time stops being your enemy. It starts becoming your accomplice. Lesson 9. Concentration versus diversification. Diversification is preached as religion because it protects people from catastrophe, and protection matters. Once wealth exists, preservation becomes intelligent, but massive wealth is rarely created through timid dispersion. It is often created through concentration, extreme focus, asymmetric conviction, deep understanding in one area where your insight, timing, and courage intersect. This is dangerous advice for the unprepared, and liberating advice for the disciplined. The crowd diversifies too early because it fears loss more than it values mastery. It wants comfort before competence. It wants safety before skill. So it spreads effort across 10 directions, learns none deeply, and wonders why nothing meaningfully changes. The builders of serious wealth often do the opposite. opposite. They concentrate energy, attention, and capital into one battlefield they understand unusually well. One company, one skill, one deal, one media engine, one niche, one asymmetric bet that could fail painfully or pay disproportionately. They accept volatility because they are not gambling blindly. They are operating from obsession, repetition, and edge. That is the key word. Edge. Not recklessness, not fantasy. Edge. A relatable example is simple. One person dabbles in 5 side hustles, never staying long enough to develop advantage. Another goes all in on a single domain, studies it with predatory depth, learns the players, the margins, the psychology, the distribution, the flaws in the market. Years later, one has stories, the other has leverage. Then, after concentration creates wealth, diversification can defend it. That is the sequence school never taught. Create with concentration, protect with diversification, reverse the order, and you may spend your life preserving almost nothing. The philosophical lesson is uncomfortable because it demands responsibility. If you choose concentration, you lose the excuse of vagueness. You must think better, study deeper, move with intention. You must face the terrifying possibility that your life will reflect the quality of your convictions. But that is exactly why the payoff can be extraordinary. Fortunes do not usually emerge from diluted desire. They emerge when a person finally chooses one hill worth bleeding for. Lesson 10. Psychological ceilings. This is the final lesson because it rules all the others. Most people do not hit an income ceiling first. They hit an identity ceiling. You can learn strategy. You can read books. You can understand assets, taxes, debt, leverage, branding, and compounding. But if your subconscious still associates wealth with guilt, power with corruption, ambition with arrogance, and independence with danger, you will sabotage your own ascent with astonishing precision. Your mind protects the familiar more fiercely than it pursues the extraordinary. That is why people say they want freedom and then cling to routines that guarantee dependence. The prison may feel humiliating, but it is known, and the unknown terrifies the nervous system more than slow suffering does. This is inherited thinking, scarcity thinking, slave thinking, not because you are weak, because you were conditioned. You were taught to ask, what is the safe choice, instead of what is the sovereign choice? You were taught to preserve approval instead of building power. You were taught to distrust those who own and admire those who obey gracefully. So even when opportunity appears, your internal ceiling whispers, this is not for you, and you listen until now. A real-life example is painful because it is ordinary. A person gets the chance to start something, invest in something, learn a monetizable skill, sell at a higher level, move into rooms that intimidate them, or charge what their value deserves. But an ancient voice inside says, people like you do not do that. So they retreat into humility, which is often fear wearing elegant clothing. Understand this clearly. Your financial reality will not outrun your self-concept for long. If you see yourself as a dependent creature, you will keep building dependence. If you see yourself as a builder of structures, your behavior changes. Your decisions sharpen. Your tolerance for wasted time collapses. Your standards rise. Your future becomes less emotional and more engineered. Money responds to identity more than people admit, because identity controls action, and action, repeated without drama, becomes destiny. So here you are, at the edge of a decision most people avoid for their entire lives. Not a decision about motivation, a decision about allegiance. Will you continue renting your mind to systems that trained you to be useful, obedient, and financially literate only enough to remain functional? Will you keep measuring success by comfort, titles, and a paycheck that vanishes the moment your labor stops? Will you stay loyal to a machine that feeds on your predictability? Or will you begin the colder path, the path of seeing clearly, the path of studying incentives instead of slogans, building assets instead of appearances, using debt with precision instead of emotion, understanding that value must be visible, that compounding must be directed, that usefulness creates access, that structure beats effort without structure, that money is not just earned, it is designed. This is not a call to become cruel, it is a call to become conscious. There is a difference. You do not need to worship greed to reject naivety. You do not need to lose your soul to stop being exploited by people who understand systems better than you do. Wisdom is not darkness, but wisdom is willing to walk through darkness long enough to name what others are too afraid to admit. That is what this moment is for. To strip illusion from your eyes, to show you that the bars were never only economic, they were psychological. And once you break those, everything else becomes strategy. So start small if you must, but start with intent. Audit your beliefs, study ownership, redirect your labor, build one asset, reduce one liability, become useful, improve your signals, learn one field deeply enough to develop edge, stop performing stability, start constructing sovereignty. Because every day you remain passive, someone else uses your time to strengthen their architecture. And every day you awaken, you reclaim a piece of your own. Final quote, the moment you stop asking for security inside another man's empire, you begin becoming the architect of your own.